Of course, I knew that we too occasionally condemned to death, but I was told that these few deaths were necessary to bring about a world in which no one would kill anyone anymore. This was to some extent true, but after all, I may not be able to live with such truths. What is sure is what I wavered, but I thought of the owl and I was able to go on. That is until the day when I saw the execution. It was in Hungary, and I felt the same horror swept over me. I was a man and I was previously felt like a child. You've never seen a man shot? No, of course, it's an invitation only to the audience of the hand-picked in advance. Consequently, you know, from pictures and books, the blindfolded, the stake, the distance, and the few soldiers. Well, no, do you realize that, on the contrary, the firing squad stands, and one and a half merits, and the condemned man? Do you know that if the condemned man took 2 steps forward, the rifles would hit him in the chest? Did you know that the shot distance and the member of the firing squad concentrate their fire on the region of the heart, and that all of which the large cerebral bullets make a hole big enough to put your fist in? No, I didn't know, because these are details that people do not speak about. The sleep of the man is more scared than the left the plague suffer. One must not keep good people awake at night. That would be in bad taste, and good taste is a matter of not harping about it. Even now, everyone knows, but I have not slept well since that time. The bad taste stays in my mouth, and I have been stopped harping on about it. That is to say, thinking. This is when I last realized that I had continued to be plagued victim, and all those years in which my heart and soul and I thought I was struggling against the plague, I learned that I had indirectly supported the death of thousands of men, and I have even caused their deaths by approving the actions of the principles that inevitably led to them. Other people did not seem to be bothered by this, or at least they did not speak about it spontaneously, but it stuck in my throat. I was with them, yet I was alone. When I did not happen to express my misgivings, they told me that I had to consider what at stake, and often gave me impressive reasons for swallowing something that I could not swallow. But I replied with the big plague sufferers, those who wear the red robes. I also have excellent reasons in such cases, and that I have accepted that the arguments of forced magister and the necessities put forward by the little plague sufferers, then I could not reject those of the big ones. They pointed out to me that the best way to prove the red robes right was to leave the monopoly of condemnation. And I decided that if one gives way once, there was no reason to stop. It seems that history has shown that I was right. Nowadays, it's a free-for-all in killing. They are all carried away by a fury of killing and cannot do otherwise. In any case, the business is not an argument. My business was in the red-headed owl, the dirty occasions, and the dirty plague-ridden mouse. I told the man in chains that he was to die and arranged everything so that he would indeed die. After so many long nights in agony in which he waited to be killed, with his eyes open, my business was the hole in which his chest, and I decided that meanwhile, at least as far as I was concerned, I would refuse ever to concede a single argument in a single one in which distinguished the butchery. Yes, I had chosen the obstinate blindness until I could see more clearly in the matter. Since I have not changed for a long time, I have been ashamed, mortally ashamed, and having been, even the distance, even with the best will in the world, the murder of my turn. When time has simply noticed that even those who are better than the rest cannot avoid killing or letting others be killed, because it is not logic of how to live, and cannot make the gestures of the world without taking the risk of being dead. Yes, I have continued to feel ashamed, and I have learned that we are all in the plague, and I have lost my peace of mind. I am still looking for today. trying to understand all of them and not be the mortal enemy of anybody. All I know is that I must do one's best to not be plague victim, and that this is the only thing that can give us hope and peace, or failing at it, a good death. This is what may give relief to men, and even if it does not save them, it does at least possible harm and even sometimes little good. And this is why I have decided to reject everything that directly or indirectly makes people die, or justifies others that make them die. That is why the epidemic has so far taught me nothing except that it must be fought at your side. And the absolute knowledge is that yes, for you, I know everything about life, as you can see, and everyone inside it himself, this plague, because no one in the world, no one is immune. And I know that we must continuously keep watch on ourselves to avoid being the distracted at the very moment we find ourselves breathing in another person's face and infecting him. What is natural is to be microbe, and the rest, health, integrity, and purity, if you like, are the effect of the will, and the will that must never relax. The decent man, the one who doesn't infect anybody, is the one who concentrates most, and will need willpower and nervous tensions to not let your mind wander. Indeed, were you in this very tyndall of the plague victim, but I must still more tiring than I want to be one. And why everyone appears tired, because nowadays everyone is a little infected, but this is why a few who do not cease to be victims experience the extreme form of tiredness in which nothing except death will deliver them. From now until then, I will know that I am worth nothing for the world itself, and that the moment I reject killing, I condemn myself to the disinfectal exile. Other men will make history. I know, too, that I clearly cannot judge those others. But there is a quality in which lacking in me to make the reasonable murder. So it's not that the murder is superior, but now I accept being that I am, and I have learned modesty. All I say is that on the earth there is pestilence, and there are victims, and as far as possible one must refuse to be on the side of the pestilence. This may seem rather simple to you. I don't know if it is simple, but I do know that it is true. I have heard many of the arguments in which nearly turned my head, and which turned enough other heads for them to consent to murder, and understood that the misfortune of mankind came from the not stating things to be clear terms. So I decided to speak and act clearly, and put myself in the right path. Consequently, I say that these are pestilence and victims, and nothing more. If in saying this I became more pestilence myself, at least I am nothing but consenting one. I am trying to be an innocent murderer. You see, it is not a high ambition. Of course, there should be a third category of the true healers, and it's a fact no one not meet many of those, because it must be hard to achieve. This is why I decided to place myself on the side of the victims. On every occasion I limit the damage. Among them I can at least see how one arrives to the third category. This is to stay at peace. When he had finished, Taru swung his leg and gently tapped his foot against the parapet. After a pause, the doctor sat up a little and asked if Taru had any idea of the road and one should follow to arrive to peace. Yes, sympathy. The ambulance sirens rang in the distance, and the cries which had been confused earlier gathered to the outskirts of the town, nearly the rocky hill. At the same time, they heard something like an explosion. The silence returned. Rayu continued to flash the lighthouse, and wind seemed to gather in strength at the same time. The breeze coming from the sea brought the smell of salt. Now that could directly hear the muffled breathing of the waves against the cliff. In short, Taru said simply, "What interests me is to know how one becomes a saint." But you don't believe in God. Precisely. Can one be a saint without God? That is the only concrete question I know today. Suddenly, a great flash of light came from the direction of the cries, and the vague noise of shouting reached the two men among the streams of wind. The light faded at once. In the distance, at the edge of the roofs, there was a reddish glow. The wind died down for a moment, and one could distinctly hear men's shouts, and the noises of the shouts, that the roar of the crowd. True got up and listened. Nothing more was to be heard. They're fighting at the gates again. It's over now, said Ryu. True muttered that there was never over, and that there would be more victims, since this was a normal course of things. Perhaps, the doctor said, but I feel more solidarity with the defectants than the saints. I don't think I have the taste for heroism and the sainthood. What interests me is to be a man. Yes, we are looking at the same thing, but I am less ambitious. Ryu thought Teru was joking, and looked at him, but in the dim light of the sky, he saw the face of a sad and serious, and the wind rose again, and Ryu felt the warmth of his skin, and Teru shook himself. Do you know, he said, what we should do for the sake of friendship? Whatever you like, said Ryu. Go bathing in the sea. Even for the future saints, it's a worthy pleasure. Ryu smiled. With our passes, we can go get to the jetty. After all, it's silly to live only in the plague. Of course, a man should fight for the victims, but if he ceases to love anything else, then what is the point of fighting? Said Ryu. Let's go. A moment later, the car stopped near the buried gates. The moon had risen in the milky sky and casting pale shadows everywhere. The town rose up in the states behind them, and the warm, sick breath was coming from which drove towards the sea. They showed the papers to the guards and examined them for quite a long time. At last they passed across the concrete floor and covered by the barrels and giving off a scent of wine and fish, and turned towards the jetty. Shortly before they arrived, the smell of iodine and the seaweed, and to them the sea was there. Only then did they hear it. It was hissy soft in the foot of the great blocks, and the jetty had then climbed up to these appeared thick and velvet, supplied the smooth of the wild animals. They sat down on some rocks facing the sea, and the water was gently swelling and sinking back. The calm breath of the sea made oily reflections appear and then disappeared at the surface of the water. In front of them the darkness was limitless, and Ryu could feel the pitted face of the rock underneath his fingers, and felt the strange happiness. Turning towards Teru, he sensed the same happiness, which forgot nothing, not even murder, on the calm and thoughtful faces of his friend. They got undressed. Ryu was first to dive in. The water, cold to begin with, seemed warm to him, and he resurfaced. After a few strokes, he realized that the sea was warm in the evening of the warmth of autumn seas would take back the earth and heat, and that he had been stored in it for a long summer months. He swam ceaselessly. Behind him, the breathing of his feet seemed to be seething foam, and the water ran lengths of his arms to stick to his legs. Heavy splashes told him that Teru had dived in. Ryu turned onto him back and stayed motionless, looking at the bowl of the sky and full of the moon and the stars. He took deep breaths, and then the sound of something strike the water became more and more distant. Strangely clear in the silence of the loneliness of the night, Teru was swimming towards him, and Ryu could soon hear his breathing. He turned around, came alongside his friend, and swam in the same rhythm. Teru was moving forward more powerfully than he had to speed up. A few minutes they swam on the equal strokes and the equal strength. Alone, far from the world, finally free from the town of the plague, Ryu was the first to stop swimming, and then returned slowly except for the moment when it came into the icy current. Without saying a word, without both speeding up and diving into the surprise of the sea. Once they had dressed again and left without saying a word, but their hearts were one, and the memory of that night was sweet for both of them. And from the distance they saw the scenery of the plague. Ryu knew that Teru was thinking, as he, that the sickness had just forgotten them. And this was good, for now they had to start again. Yes, they had to start again. The plague forgot no one, and too long during December, it flared up in the chest of the townspeople. It lit the oven and filled the camps in empty-handed shades. In short, it continued to advance with patience, jerky steps, and the authorities counted on the cold weather to halt its advance. But it came through the fight rigorous in the season without pause. We had to wait, but the longer you wait, the longer you are able to wait. Our whole town lived without a future.